Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, clinical psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, another week.
Another one.
It's not another one bites the dust. It's another one in the books.
Another one what's his name? Words. People blanking. And another one. He's DJ Khaled. There we go.
Yeah, see, there's things you know that I don't know. Yeah, I think I've heard of that, but
you've heard it. Maybe not my version of it, but you've heard it.
All right. So you already told me you didn't watch the Super Bowl. Did you do anything else instead of watching it?
Work.
Oh, that's no fun.
I was writing a report. I was watching a TV show kind of like in the background. I was preparing for the podcast, doing a little bit of that. Eating some pizza. That was the most Super Bowl like thing I did was eat pizza.
Eat pizza. That fits. I did watch, but the game was, you don't know, I guess, since you didn't watch.
Well, I mean, I know who won.
Yeah, but it was like basically a shutout. Like the Eagles basically kicked Kansas City's butt. Yeah. I do not follow sports, but the one thing I do a year is I watch the Super Bowl because I do not mind like a good competitive fun game. So it's just for that. And then
one thing, like if I was with someone, then I would watch it, but like sitting by myself and watching it is no fun. So
well, I watched it with the kids at halftime, and then I went upstairs to the bedroom and watched it in bed by myself. So half of it I watched by myself. But the halftime show was interesting. A lot of statements,
a lot of chatter on social media about it today.
Yeah, I was literally like the moment it happened looking, waiting, but there was like a delay in people and news things able to like put it all out there because I'm not super familiar with Kendrick Lamar, but now I am like looking him up, reading up about him. So I wanted to see like, did I get everything that he was trying to get across? Did I miss things? Like there's things I didn't know the details about.
Did you get his diss to Drake?
I read about his diss to Drake and I understood it later.
Track, but...
I know, and he won a bunch of Grammys apparently for it. So, but I get it now. I like read up on it and I get it. But I was getting the other symbolism, like the American flag stuff, the prison stuff, that just like the whole. He did it tastefully. He did it very. I don't know how else to say it. Like it was art. It was art.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big boom, fireworks, whatever.
It wasn't showy. It was just like making a statement, like making. Yeah.
Right. So,
thought it was really weird because literally not knowing what the Super Bowl halftime show was going to be. Like I knew it was Kendrick Lamar.
Right.
That morning I was talking to my mom about my love of Samuel L. Jackson and then graces the stage and I was like, yes, he's done it again.
That's so funny. Yeah, I was like, oh, look at that. And Serena Williams. Where'd she come from?
Well, I was looking at him because a show that I may cover in a future episode, I saw like a preview for it and I was like, oh, that's really good casting for him. So
Samuel Jackson. He is a treasure.
A national treasure.
I also braved this weekend indoor water park in upstate New York at a gymnastics meet. So if I'm not sick in 2 days, I am like the most immune system strong person ever because the amount of cooties in that building, oh my God.
That's the first thing I thought of when you said that. I was like, both in one weekend? Do you want to die?
Well, it was all in the same place. It was a gymnastics meet at this indoor water park resort full of people, families, snotty kids in elevators. I mean, my child did well. She won first place for bars and second for all around and second for a bunch of other things. So that was good. And, she stayed up late and had a social life and I got to chat with moms. So nice. That was my social life. But, it's interesting that, the Super Bowl, the way it fell, just back to that, like Black History Month, things are going on in the nation right now. Like, I just felt like it was very, very timely and it all sort of.
And it was also the first Super Bowl that a president has ever attended, that a sitting president has ever attended.
Yeah.
So I thought there was a little bit of calculation in that as well.
I agree. Like I said, it's art. Art is art. Make your statement, take what you may from it, but I respect it. I think it was pretty cool, but it just, all of it, all of it falling together. But I think that, that's pretty neat. And, we had talked about doing like a bigger episode for Black History Month, and you're going to do a nod to that today, but I had something planned and you had something else we had thought of that were a lot more in depth. So we're going to save that for next year.
TDLR, I was not prepared, so I messed everything up.
But that's okay, because we can do a little lighter version of something now. We'll do more in-depth stuff for next year. We're a little more seasoned and kind of can, take it on appropriately. But I think it's important that we recognize that.
Yeah.
And, other timely things. Even though we're doing something fun, it's nice to mention sort of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and to, say that, we're not blind to what's going on out there, even though it's fun to sit in our little podcast bubble, we know what's going on out there in the world.
Yeah. So we're sort of here to hopefully present like a place that everyone can feel, that they can come listen. We're open-minded. We want to hear from you guys. We want you guys to hear from us in a way that like we feel that everybody sort of can relate, and, I don't know, just know that we're here for all the peeps.
Yeah.
Nicole, you say it better than me. I don't know.
Shall I say we're holding space and you can reach over and hold my finger?
Oh,
Ariana
wait.
Grande
but
style.
Wait, your finger and my finger are not near each other. Wait.
You can't do it. We're not high, I swear.
Nobody knows what we're doing. This is an audio podcast. I have to now go post that clip.
Of that. I know that.
Because everyone's like, what are they doing?
Well, I would hope the holding space reference people would get the visual, but
here's the thing. I don't know any of these references either.
Okay. TDLR, there was an interview with Ariana and Cynthia for Wicked, and Cynthia was responding to a question that she didn't fully understand and got a little like choked up about, and then Ariana just randomly holds her finger and like taps it a few times in the interview. And everybody's like, what is happening?
Okay.
But then they ask Ariana about it after. She's like, I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what they were talking about. I don't know the question. She just looked upset. Finger tapping seemed like a good idea to me at the time.
All right. Is that a new technique? Maybe that's something we should start implementing.
Well, tapping is a technique. I could talk about that on another episode, but it
True.
can be something that can be used.
Isn't that like face tapping?
I'm going to talk about my drink now, shall I?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's stay on focus, on task here. We are way out in space right now.
Later. So my drink, for those of you who can see, it is pink, so putting it in the pink glass didn't really change the look of it. But my drink is called, drumroll please, the Fly Girl Spritzer.
Ooh.
And yes, it contains, so I will say, we're going to post the link in the show notes. It will be posted on our socials before you guys listen. I don't really know how to adjust the ingredient amounts because the list is crazy. So apparently this one drink should be an entire bottle of Black Girl Magic Riesling. I'm not opposed to, but it's a Monday night, so I gotta.
So maybe it's a like pitcher?
No, because it says make in a wine glass.
Oh,
so
okay.
A whole ass bottle of Black Girl Magic Riesling, 3 ounces of elderflower liqueur, 3 ounces of cranberry juice, and 3 ounces of ginger beer or soda water. So I didn't really measure the wine, but this is certainly not a full bottle. It's like,
correct,
I would say a normal glass of wine. And then I added those other ingredients on top. And then basically just add all the ingredients in a wine glass over ice, stir with a straw, and garnish with sugared cranberries, and enjoy. I actually had sugared cranberries somewhere. I couldn't find them to save my life, so I threw some blackberries in there.
Yeah, it's cute.
So, and that cocktail is named after the person I'm going to be speaking about today, who is Simone Biles.
And I was just at a gymnastics meet. I'm a Biles fan.
You were. So when we were first talking about doing a theme episode for Black History Month, I started doing some research and looking at things, but a lot of the stories, especially in mental health, are really truly focused on trauma in the Black community and a lot of negativity, people committing suicide, dying from overdose, racial violence, things like that, which are real and they're authentic and they happen. But I really wanted to try to shine the light more on Black excellence and positivity in the community and persevering. So I felt like talking about Simone, there is some tragedy in there. There is some drama in there. There is some trauma, but it's not only that. Most people, when they think of Simone Biles, they think of success, they think of power, they think of overcoming odds and persevering in the sport. So that's why I wanted to focus on her for today's episode. So I watched her Netflix series, Simone Biles Rising. Did you watch that?
Yes, of course I did.
Did you watch
Wait,
both parts?
did I watch the second half? I don't think I watched the second half. I have to go back.
So that's the thing. When they advertised it, they advertised it as part 1 and part 2.
Right.
When you go to watch it now, it's all under just one thing, and it's 4 episodes.
Yeah, so part 2 and the last 2 episodes, then I'll have to watch because I don't think I ever saw the other part.
I think originally the first were broken up into 4 episodes, and then when I think they released the second half about the Paris Olympics, they just combined it all.
Okay.
But yeah, I only watched 4 episodes, but I will say they're like an hour each, so it was like 4 hours of watching stuff. So that is the name of the documentary. It's on Netflix, came out in 2024. The first half came out in 2024. Second half came out after the Paris Olympics. So like I was saying, I wanted to focus on positive aspects of the Black experience, even though we know that everything is not simple for Simone and everything is not easy and none of this has come to her easy. So the documentary starts off right before the summer 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. And for those of you who don't remember, this is when Simone famously got the twisties and took herself out of competition. And so the documentary is really good because in the first part of it, they really talk about the context of what was going on at the Tokyo Olympics. And so I think a lot of people didn't even consider context when they were thinking about that Olympics for all of the athletes, not just for Simone. So as a reminder, I'm sure we are all traumatized by the number 2020. That was when COVID-19 was occurring across the globe. It wasn't just here, didn't start here, didn't end here. So we need to remember that this was affecting everyone globally. And which at this point, it's kind of sad to me because there's people who were born after that and are like human beings now. So that's kind of scary.
Oh, yeah. They're like turning 4 or 5 year old kids now. Oh my goodness.
Even though it feels like just yesterday. And so basically what happened was in the Tokyo Olympics, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, all the athletes had to wear masks as much as possible. There was no crowd in the arena. No family members were allowed to travel with them as they typically are for Olympics or other competitions. And they also had to undergo daily, sometimes multiple times daily, COVID testing. And then there was this just general fear of getting ill. You know, you go all the way to the Olympics to get sick. Like nobody wants that to happen. Right. And so there was a lot of tension and pressure outside of just performing in whatever respective sport you were there for. And then, as we know...
So just a reminder, everyone, too, technically the 2020 Olympics was held in 2021 because it was delayed a whole year. And some of them lost a lot of training time, too, in the beginning because everything was shut down.
Folks lost a lot of training. Yeah. And so Simone pulled out of the Olympics because she said that she had the twisties. And so that description of it, lots of people who've never gotten off their couch in their life, aka me, but I wasn't making, assumptions about the twisties, but a lot of people had a lot of opinions.
Oh, of course.
Pulled out. And so just for very brief overview, the twisties is, there's two links in the show notes about what it is. But essentially from my understanding is it's sort of a disorder of what we would call proprioception. So losing yourself in space, not knowing where your body is oriented, how you're moving. And so that can be really dangerous if you're having that, if you're just walking. But if you are up in the air, flipping around with no protective gear and going at the power and the speed that Simone Biles is going at, you literally could die. It is not a question. It is not a joke.
Absolutely.
And so, and other than that, it can just be really disorienting. Like imagine you're up in the air and you're flipping and you're doing this routine you've done a million times, and now you don't know where you are in space and you land. And it's like, the only thing I could equate it to would be like if you're in a jet that's going 1,000,000 miles per hour and then it just stops.
Right.
And so it's like, not only is it the getting disoriented while it's happening, then the stopping after. That's also got to throw off your equilibrium and anything else that's going on for you.
And even without that, this is one of the most dangerous sports that exists. And so throw that in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to get into like the danger of it in a couple minutes. But so she was experiencing this, and to her credit, she knew pretty quickly on. I think she said she had only tried like 2 or 3 times when like really feeling it. And then she said, no, I'm out. Like she pulled herself out. And I think the problem with that was that because it's more of an invisible experience, like a lot of people were just like, you looked fine. Like, oh, you didn't land perfectly. You're fine. Like, are you quitting? Are you a loser? Like, the one that got me so enraged was a bunch of people are like, oh, she just didn't feel like it.
Oh, yeah.
This woman hasn't worked her entire life. To just not feel like it one day.
Right. Like literally the most esteemed athletes on the planet, physically above, beyond, like, yeah. She also didn't want to let her team down, because if she screwed up, she'd rather have 4 healthy people compete than her.
Exactly. And then just like going back to like, this is in no way over exaggerating this. If you land wrong when you are doing a flip of any magnitude, let alone Simone Biles' 8 feet in the air magnitude, you could seriously injure or kill yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could injure or kill yourself if you just trip and fall the right, the wrong way,
right,
or the right way. And so I think her having the wherewithal to realize, like, I have to stop now before this gets really dangerous or really bad. But then also, like you said, considering her team and how a negative score or an injury could impact them. And so she was really making the best choice, both for herself and her own safety, but also for her team. And a lot of people were throwing comments around like, oh, she's a quitter. She owes her team better. She's abandoning them. She's a failure, a dropout, a disappointment. And one thing a lot of male athletes were saying was like, well, this is a life lesson. You need to learn to not give up. Really, you're going to tell me that Simone never felt like she wanted to give up before?
right.
That she never went through something tough before in, being a professional at the caliber that she's at for literal decades? You think she's never had a rough day and been like, I don't want to do this anymore? She's a human being. I'm sure she has. It's like, I feel like so many people just loved to shit on her for that.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really couldn't find many articles about, I know they were out when it first happened, was this kind of overwhelming male versus female response. Yes, lots of females still crapped on her too and didn't like her, but I feel like a lot of women were really proud of her for speaking up for herself, for her mental health, for her safety. I think a lot of athletes, both male and female, were like, okay, she knows her body, she knows how to do this. And for her to speak up and say this now on the world stage when she's under all this pressure, like, that's really big. That's huge.
Right.
So there was a lot of divisiveness about it. But I think what's kind of heartbreaking in the documentary is like she's repeatedly going through these texts and she's in comments and everything. And she said that she knows normally she can like step away from it, just read a couple or whatever. But she just kind of got caught in this loop in her own head of like her own disappointment, her own frustration, her own upset. And then she's being sucked into all this negativity online. And it was really a recipe for disaster. And I think that, again, speaks to her strength and her courage to move through that, because as we know, this is not a spoiler alert, she did compete in the Paris Olympics 4 years later, or technically 3 years later, and she did earn medals.
She kicked butt. That's what she did. She kicked butt. She is the most amazing athlete on the planet.
She is. She had her redemption tour, and she let everybody know that, lest they forget, she is the GOAT.
Yeah.
And so one of the articles that I attached for information about the twisties is really great because it talks about some very technical medical things that occur when that's happening. And so it's not just mental health. Mental health can definitely affect it. And that's why I really liked this article, because it kind of balanced it. Because I think the way that she described it was like she was in her own head and she was anxious and worried about it, which she was, but people took that and ran with it and used that as a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's really far more complicated than that.
Absolutely. I always explain to patients, like, I'll liken this to vertigo. Your eyes and your ears tell your brain where you are in space.
Yeah.
And if they don't agree, your brain's like, what the? Like, it doesn't know what to do. So if anyone has ever experienced vertigo, having vertigo flipping through the air,
or
that
8 feet in the air, even if you're not
right. Right. So it's very disconcerting.
Yeah. And there's another part of the film later on where she makes kind of this throwaway comment, but it's really jarring for me to watch, thinking of the mental health aspect of everything that she's been through. She said that every time she goes out on the floor and performs a routine, her first goal is not to die. And some people may think that's dramatic, but if you see the speed and the power that she uses in every single thing that she does, that's a very real risk every single time.
Yeah.
And it seems like she's to the point where she doesn't necessarily enjoy that adrenaline rush anymore. She just kind of takes it as part of the job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where there's some people who are thrill seekers who are like, oh, I'm going to try not to die today. And they're saying it in a fun, exciting, jokey way. But she's just like, no, this is part of what happens. And that's my goal in doing these things.
Wow.
Which, I mean, I feel like any gymnast, especially at the Olympic level, the complexity of the things that they're doing, that is literally probably one of the first or second concerns they need to have.
But she's constantly pushing the boundaries beyond anybody else. So
exactly, which I'll get into in a little bit. But one thing that I think a lot of people didn't realize is, so those Olympics happened in 2021 because of COVID. She was not back to full training until a year and a half. And this queen made it to the Olympics and won.
And kicked butt.
And kicked butt. So all the haters out there need to just sit back. Go sit back on your couch. Which she does make like a funny comment at one point when she's reading the negative comments. She was like, oh yeah, you sitting on your couch eating your chips. You're going to tell me that I don't know how to do this? I was like, yes, girl. Like, it's truth.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's a critic. So that was what happened in 2020. And then, like I said, she was kind of not in full training until a year and a half after that incident occurred. What I do want to remind everyone, lest you forget, she still won a bronze medal that Olympics for an individual.
Right.
For balance beam.
Right. So she just came back and did beam. That was it.
So despite having the twisties, despite having all this negative press and attention from the world, despite having her own internal struggles, she still came and was the third best in the world. So again, like, this is not somebody who's a quitter or a loser or who gave up. Like, this is a true athlete. And I feel like a lot of people for a long time didn't consider a lot of women's sports to be athletes. And so that's why I keep using that word over and over again, because they are.
Yeah. Oh, there.
So one thing I feel like if I didn't talk about, people would be like, why didn't you say that? So just as far as part of psychology, there is, and a lot of people have probably heard this from TV shows, both reality-based and drama shows, is about this optimal level of performance anxiety. Particularly in sports, it's something that a lot of trainers are talking to their athletes about, a lot of sports psychologists are talking about. And so in a nutshell, the Yerkes-Dodson law, it's a bell curve. And so basically what it is, it's saying the optimal level of arousal, or anxiety, as some people call it, is where you're going to be focused enough, be activated enough to perform at your best without that anxiety or without that activation getting in your way. So if you're underactivated, you're not going to try as hard. You're probably not going to perform as well. And if you're overactivated, you're going to be too anxious and you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be able to focus as well. So there's this very fine line or fine portion of the bell curve that you get that optimal mix of anxiety and focus to be able to perform at your best, to get that adrenaline pumping.
I think that's funny. I think we've experienced that, but I never actually knew that that was a true theory, and it makes sense. I just never knew that. I'm sure there's some balance of neurotransmitters that, your body hits that's just right.
Yeah. So like when you have low arousal, think of like if you're at work and it's a slow day and you've got some paperwork to do, it's like the schlub work, the stuff that is not interesting, is not activating for us. Versus when we are too highly aroused, our activation is too high, that's then triggering that flight, fight, fawn, or freeze response. That's more of a trauma response that people have. And I'll talk about Simone's experience with trauma responses in a little bit. But there have been many studies about getting to that optimal level of performance. And that's really where I feel like I was taught. I don't have the references, so if I'm wrong, I apologize to everyone. But I feel like that's kind of one of the first things that really sparked the worlds of sports psychology, and going far more into that is just finding how does someone perform at their best.
Real quick question on sports psychology. I mean, I've heard about this. Is there like extra specific certifications that somebody can get, or are they taking what their already trained knowledge is and just going on their own?
So it is specialized knowledge. A lot of the folks who are in sports psychology are not just working with like the mental health side of things. They're working with the organizational psychology of it, of being on a team, of the business aspect of sports, especially for professional athletes. And then they also have special training in physiology, motor learning, sports medicine, learning what the optimal training for athletes is. And so even though at the core they're a psychologist, they definitely have more specified training.
Okay.
As according to the American Psychological Association, they don't talk about needing a special license. And so this is what it says. It says, this proficiency does not include those who have earned a doctoral degree in sports psychology but are not licensed. And so because it looks a little bit different, licensure is different than getting the degree and the training. And so I'm sure you can get certifications in it, but you might not necessarily need to be licensed. And a lot of this really depends on where your scope of practice is, what state you're in, if you're working for a team, what they require versus what they just want someone to consult on.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what sports psychology was. You're skipping ahead in my notes.
Sorry, I had a question. It was pertinent.
It was relevant. You're right. And then, like I was saying before, there was a lot of that social negativity, the media pressure, and then also these interviews that she would have to go to. And kind of every time she met with a different newscaster, she had to explain herself over and over and over again. And so that can really wear on someone as well, not just seeing what's on social media or talking to people in your life or hearing people say things.
My impression of her, too, is that she's naturally introverted and, you know, she's been put on this stage and that's very difficult for her.
Yeah, I mean, I think the impression that I get from her from the documentary is that when she's in a comfortable space, when she's people that she trusts and she loves, she's like funny and bubbly and outgoing, but people have kind of put her in this spotlight and almost given her like a persona. You know, there's Simone Biles and there's Simone Biles. You know, there's two kind of different people, just like Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. So another part I just wanted to talk about really briefly is the amount of pressure that any of these Olympic level athletes are putting on themselves, that they feel from the team, even if their other teammates are not explicitly doing it, maybe coming from coaches, or just the fact that, hey, we're the 5 people who got to the Olympics from our whole country. So some of that, you know, intrinsic guilt or pressure that you might be putting on yourself. And then she says it multiple times, like it wasn't just for her team. It was for her country. Like imagine the pressure on one little 4-foot-something woman that an entire effing country is like, you better do this.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, Simone Biles was gymnastics. Like I felt bad for other athletes, and she said she felt bad for her team, that she was often overshadowing them unintentionally because people were putting the focus on her. And then there's another part in the documentary, I believe it's in the 24 Olympics. Yeah, I believe it's when they're in Paris. Other people from other countries are cheering for her and saying like, you need to win. So it's not just one whole giant country. It's like the whole freaking world.
She's the GOAT.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk about the GOAT controversy at the end. Girl, I covered it all. So the documentary goes through a little bit of the history of gymnastics, specifically in the USA. And so a long time ago in the 70s and the 60s, a lot of the athletes were older. You know, the oldest athlete to compete at that time, I think she was 30 years old. And so that was just kind of what gymnastics was like at that time. And then after Nadia Comaneci won and was trained by the Karolis, the U.S. decided to hire the Karolis to come and do their training, and they were really focused on getting the younger, more nimble, more agile girls into the sport because they are stronger. You know, we're all stronger when we're younger. We're all faster when we're younger. And so some of the intention behind it wasn't necessarily negative. I know there's a lot of mixed reviews about the Karolis and a lot of negativity, but they did produce winners year after year for different countries. And so something they were doing was working, but at what cost? And so I'm not going to go down the whole thing because I could definitely do a talk on Athlete A. Did you watch that?
Oh, absolutely. I did. So that's a whole nother, absolutely.
That's a whole nother thing. But it stems from them because it was part of the mentality in sports then, in specifically gymnastics. They would say it. They were going to break these girls. They were going to push them and push them and push them until they literally physically could not do these things anymore. And what ended up happening was a lot of these young girls were maybe going to the Olympics, were maybe achieving what they didn't think they could achieve, but then they were so severely injured that they literally could not compete anymore.
You know, physically and mentally.
They were being forced to retire due to physical injuries. And that doesn't happen as often in other sports.
I mean, now there is something called Safe Sport that came out of all of this.
Yes, which covers all sports and it covers lots of different things.
But I think it came from a lot of this.
Yeah. And there was a part in the documentary, which I know that you watched the first part, and that I know that you watched this when it happened in person, because I certainly did. You talked a lot about Carrie Shrug.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing what happened and knowing what occurred, when they kept replaying that footage, I literally could not watch. I'm not a squeamish person. I don't get like overly anxious by stuff, but I literally had to look away knowing that this girl literally ruined her body and ended her career with that vault.
Yeah.
And she, I mean, if people have not seen it, she literally was crawling on her hands and knees away from the vault and had to go again.
Yeah.
Like this.
This was what, 90?
Like I stubbed a toe.
I don't remember what year it was. In the 90s, though.
It was in the 90s. I want to say 90.
Was it 96?
Yeah.
I think it was 96. That was a huge year, though. That was like.
And she won, but at what cost?
Right. The team won. But no, in the end, they didn't need her points of her vault to win it.
Yeah, which, you know, that's a...
But it was all the whole drama built up of the whole thing and the hero and whatever. And
yeah. And something that Simone and her coaches talk about is that because that was the type of training that was going on back then, a lot of these girls were destroying their bodies. And I say girls because they were. The majority of them were under 18. These were
Mm-hmm.
girls. And they had the pressure of a country on them. And these are little girls. These are little girls that could probably kick your ass and maybe should, but still, age-wise, development-wise,
emotionally,
these are still children. Yes.
Yeah.
And what they talk about, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Keep taking you off topic.
It's okay. Oh, what Simone talks about is that she has, despite, being the GOAT, having won, I believe they said before she won the 24 Olympics, she had 37 medals. Jeez. 37. One person. 37. And these are 37. I think she said gold.
Oh my God.
So
yeah, she is
Which
amazing.
For those of you who don't really follow gymnastics, you get gold in other things other than the Olympics, but still. It's not easy.
No.
And I'm sure she wasn't talking about, her first gold that she won, in her little local gym. I'm sure she's talking about major titles that she won.
Yeah.
But she talks about how that training that those girls and women were under kind of informed her training. And so her training has been developed in such a way to put the least possible amount of stress on her body to prevent injury. And if you really look back at her track record, she's had very few serious injuries compared to other athletes her same age, her same caliber, even in her own same gym. She's had less injuries than they have. And so I think that helped dispel the myth that you needed these young girls to do this, because even though she says over and over that she's old and it's hard when she's 26 or 27 in the documentary, she's still out there kicking butt of the 14-year-olds. So she has the ability, but I think as she's gotten older, she's kind of said, okay, I know I can only do this for so long. I know I need to preserve my body, because she wants to have a life after gymnastics.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of these girls, especially the era before her, the Fab Five era, all of that, I don't know if they were necessarily given the option to have a life after Olympics, to have a life after gymnastics. I don't think it was ever put on their radar. Where she is, she's buying a house, she has a husband, she has plans, she has things she wants to do. There's this really adorable part at the very end of the documentary where she goes back into her house, like, how they're building a house.
Yes.
And she goes into it months later. It's still not finished, but like it's definitely closer to finished. And she's like, this is going to be my office. I don't know what I'm going to do in here, but I'm going to have a desk and I'm going to have a computer and I'm going to Google stuff.
Right.
So it's like she's able to make these plans for herself outside of the world of sports, where I felt like a lot of girls in other generations were never given that as a possibility, even though they knew, unless the sport kills me, one day I'm going to have to figure out something else to do. I think the other part of it too is the fame of it is so fleeting. Like, we remember these names, like Carrie Shrug, like Dominique Moceanu, like all of the Gabby Douglas. We remember the names, but I couldn't tell you where any of them are now, other than they make an appearance in this documentary.
Dominique Moceanu owns a gym because I follow her on social media.
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to say. I'm assuming once you get to that Olympic level, I'm sure there's lots of training and gym ownership opportunities, things like that.
Shannon Miller
don't happen anymore.
I follow Shannon Miller. She had ovarian cancer, survived that. She's got a family.
Mary Lou Retton had
she was very sick recently in the past year or two.
Yeah, but I think she recovered.
She did, yeah. But, I follow some of them, so I know a little bit. But it's true. I mean, nowadays there's a little bit of a difference, because now you can go back and you can actually compete in college, and you can earn sponsors, which you weren't allowed to do previously. So it gives a little bit more longevity to their careers.
Right.
So
is it Gabby Hernandez?
Lori Hernandez.
Like,
she was
now commentating on stuff. So
but
there's more opportunities now.
Right. But she was the Olympics in Brazil, whatever. I can't think of the name of the city. And she was only 15. There you go, Rio. She was 15 or 16, and that was before that NCAA ruling change. So she had to decide, am I going pro and getting sponsorships, or am I going to be able to go to college? Yeah. And then she got injured, couldn't go to the next Olympics. And so her mind was already...
She's a Jersey girl, Old Bridge.
She is. She's very local. She had a whole another trauma too with her gym and her coach, but that's a whole nother story. But, now at least there's ability to have some longevity in the sport, go to school, get a degree, do more things with it, which they didn't have just a few years ago.
Yeah. And so other things that have changed in the sport. So we have all heard in retrospect about the sex abuse scandal with Larry Nassar. And so that definitely really puts a stain on the U.S. Olympic team, because that was who was hired.
Yeah.
He didn't just, weasel his way in there. He was working at a college doing this, and they hired him and brought him in. And again, there's a whole different documentary about that we could talk about later. But Simone talks about how when it all came out, at first she wasn't openly talking about it, because a lot of those girls and women, because a lot of them were older, no longer in the field, were talking about it openly, but she was still actively competing. And so there was kind of this divide of, do I speak up, do I say what my experience is, or do I keep my head in the game? And it seems like she did a lot of keeping her head in the game until she finally did, find the strength to speak up about it and testify about that. So she did speak about the sex abuse scandal. But that's another thing, she alludes to, or I don't think it's her, I think there's a sports historian or someone in the documentary who basically talks about, we don't believe, to the information we have, we don't believe that the Karolis fed into that, but the way that they regimented things, where these girls were not allowed to speak up, they could not have fun in the gym, it was kind of militarized. And so that kind of led to this silent trust of people, even if something didn't feel right or if something didn't go right, just not this culture of not speaking up and not speaking out. And so even though it doesn't seem like they were aware of it, and as far as we know, they were not contributing in it, they were contributing in this culture that was keeping these girls quiet. And that's the other thing of it, these are little girls. And so when a 30-year-old man or a 45-year-old man or a 50-year-old woman is telling them, you do this, a 12 or a 13-year-old in the gym who wants to be on the Olympic team in 3 years, she's going to do and say what they want.
Whatever they tell.
That's what she wants to do. That's where she wants to be.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too, they don't really talk about too much about the parents, but they do say, like, at the training camps and stuff, no family allowed, no parents allowed. So when these things are happening, there's not necessarily someone there to advocate for them in the gym, at least not at that time.
I don't know on the elite level now, but I know all gyms who are USAG certified, you have to have a viewing area or cameras now so that you can watch practice. They are not allowed to deny that. And if a gym does, that's a big warning sign that there could be, whether it's verbal abuse or whatever, but
that's just practice. And a lot of this abuse happened in the training rooms, in, the workout
rooms,
right. Behind closed doors.
Right.
And I don't remember all the details, but I remember the impression that I got from athlete A was a lot of these girls didn't even realize it was happening to each other. They thought it was just them.
Right.
Or they knew, or it felt weird and it felt wrong, but they didn't know that it was sexual abuse.
Right. They thought it was a medical procedure.
Yeah. And that's what they were told. They were explicitly told, this is a medical procedure. This is going to help you perform better. And so, like I said, I didn't want to go too deep into that, but I feel like I covered enough of it to acknowledge that was something else going on in Simone's life that she had experienced, that she had to deal with. And then also something that I feel like is plain as day, but for some reason we have to talk about it because people like to pretend these things don't happen. But there's severely limited diversity, especially in USA gymnastics.
Yes.
And so there were some statistics about how the first African-American woman to, I believe, participate in any of the Olympics was in 92. And then the first one in gymnastics was 96. And this is at the Olympic level.
That's Dominique Dawes.
Yes.
Right. Dominique Dawes.
Yeah. Dominique Dawes was in 96. 92 was Betty Okino. So I think something that a lot of people don't realize is, I'm not saying that those are the only Black girls or people of color in the gym. No, those are the only ones who made it. But I can bet that there's probably not a whole lot of girls of different colors in the gym to begin with.
Right. Now, though, because of Simone,
now there's more Black girls out there with the magic. I love it.
It's so cute. And Jordan Childs, we have to give her a little shout out because she is amazing.
And she's killing it in college level.
I know. And just the two of them together, their little friendship is adorable, her and Simone. And I just feel like they just brought to light like athleticism, but also being like good people, like role models, cheering each other on, positive.
Well, and Lori Hernandez too, when she would mouth to herself like, "You got this," like right before she would compete. I just remember that from Rio. Like every time she went up there, she would say it to herself to like the point where people are now like reading her lips. Or then how like Jordan Childs would wink at the camera. I'd be like, "Yes, like,
I love her."
Owning their power. Which I feel like a lot of times in that more Crowley era, they weren't allowed to show those personality traits.
Absolutely not. No, they were little robots.
Yeah. You had to be little I mean, I hate to say it, but you had to be little Russian dolls. You all had to look the
Yeah.
same. You were in height order. You all had the same exact hair. You all had the same exact, posture, everything. Where
Yeah.
now these girls are allowed to be more of themselves, which I think helps too, because you can put yourself into the sport. You can put yourself into what you're doing, and then that makes you want to succeed even more because it means something
Yeah.
personally to you. And we talked about injuries, we talked about diversity. And then the other thing, like I was talking about before, ages. There's some really great statistics straight from the Olympics about the changes in diversity and ages over the years from 92 to 2024. So I attached that in the show notes, but it's really interesting. And they broke it in to men's teams and women's teams, not individual sports, but it does show you that, there's a big difference. The one thing I thought was really weird was, and I don't know why, I don't remember who was part of the team back then, but in 2008, the Women Olympics, all of the women's teams had 0 people of color. What was going on in 2008?
2008.
Yeah,
So
I can't really recall.
was that
what was
pre Gabby Douglas?
Yeah, because she was 2016.
So well, she was in 2 Olympics. Gabby Douglas.
She would have been 2012
right.
and 2010.
Right. No, 4 years. I don't know. I'd have to look back at the team, but yeah, I vaguely remember. That's like the team I probably know the least, and that might be why. Like, I don't remember as many details from them.
But then on the men's team, it's from 2000 to 2004, 0 athletes of color. So it's definitely been a trend that happened in the past. Luckily, it's building. In 2024, there are 80 women athletes of color and 40 men athletes of color. So there's definitely a change.
Men's Olympics in Paris, my favorite, Fred Flips, yes. Fred Richardson, I think. Mm-hmm. So I went to the Gold Across America tour and with my daughter, and literally I was fangirling and screaming like crazy, seeing all of them up close. But I was, had followed some of the men on social media, and he was really on the forefront of getting men's, gymnastics out there. And he's, a person of color, and he's just so much fun. I was like screaming. My daughter got so embarrassed by me because I screamed, Freddie! And she was like, because he walked right by me.
You trying
like,
to throw
oh,
your
God.
panties? Like, come on, girl.
But, like,
athlete. I know he can probably bench press you, but still. And then there's another chart just about the average in ages. And so that is also increasing over time. With men's, it's kind of gone up and down a little bit less drastically than with women, but it looks like the youngest female athletes were in 1992. And the oldest have been this year in 2024.
Yeah, they're all grown women.
Exactly, owning their power and still in the game, not ready to give it up to the young ones.
Seriously, yeah. And they also, so between Jordan Childs, Suni Lee, she represents a specific. Now I don't want to get it wrong. A specific population that is. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Filipino?
No, she is not Filipino. Hold on, let me Google that real quick. No, for real though, because it was a very big deal.
I feel like anytime we're seeing someone other than a white blonde girl, it's an opportunity to talk about that we are more than that in the U.S. And I'm not shitting on the white blonde girls; they're great too. But we just need to see more diversity. We need to see a little bit from everyone.
Suni Lee ethnicity, she is Hmong, Hmong. Yes, because I was like, I'm going to get this wrong. Mm-hmm. So she's the first Hmong American woman of Asian descent to win an all-around Olympic title.
Yeah. Awesome. I also just love, of that team, the personalities. Everybody had their own distinct personality, but they all just meshed well together and cheered each other on. Yeah. So it was a really good mix in the team of different strengths, and everybody kind of balanced each other out. So the mental health stuff we've kind of talked about already, making sure that there's that work-life balance. If not right now, then at least in the future that it's planned for, that we know that this is not a forever thing for these folks, whether it's age or not. I think for Simone, we don't know what she's going to do for sure. She hasn't made a public announcement. Everybody's saying, oh, she's retired, she's done. But maybe she's not.
Who knows?
Who knows? And it's her choice. And I think that is so empowering, is for her to go out on her own terms versus it being an injury that sidelines her. And then just a lot of just general mental health things I'm not going to go into, but just for people to think about when you're thinking about these athletes, when you're thinking about everything that Simone has been through. She has this courage to perform on this international stage, just to get out there and do these things, and then to do them well, and then to do them over, and then to up the stakes. That takes a lot of strength and courage. She talks a lot in the documentary about certainty versus self-doubt. And so one of the things that her therapist taught her to do in the Olympics in 2024, when she was really getting upset, is telling her, like, you can do this routine. You know this routine. Get through this routine. Instead of, I need this score, or I need to beat this person, or I need to do this. It's more of, know what you're doing. You just need to execute this, and kind of drowning out the rest of that noise, which I think is really important.
Personal goals, more, more what you need to do for you.
She talks a lot about that, about how, she wanted to win certain things going into the Olympics, and she did. But for her, it was just getting back on that stage and saying, I'm not done yet. I'm not gone yet. And so just getting there was a big achievement for her. Then talking about the mental and emotional strength that is required, the confidence, the fear because of the danger, trusting yourself and your abilities. But something they don't talk about at all that I feel like is really interesting and underrepresented in the field of the mental health of athletes is trusting in your coaches, just knowing that there has been abuse by coaches in the past, and trusting in the equipment. I don't think people get it. Like, you know how to do the balance beam in your gym, or you know how to do the bars in your gym, and then you have to travel across the country and get on equipment that you've never been on before. And every piece of equipment feels a little bit different, acts a little bit different.
My daughter was talking about this because she talks about this floor's bouncy, this one's not, these bars are this, these bars are not. And there was a controversy with one of the Olympics because they're supposed to have a touch warm up on the same equipment.
It was during the 2021. They did
warm
up.
Right. The whole point is you're supposed to warm up on the same equipment that you compete on. That's generally done your entire career going up.
Yeah, and they
so even
got one pass on the equipment before they had to perform in the 2021
right.
Olympics.
So in normal warm-ups in regular USAG meets, even if there's two sets of bars and the judges can alternate which one they're judging on, the one you warmed up on is the one you compete on. The judge will move seats if they're trying to make the move through, because it's a different feel.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember seeing it. I remember seeing it. I don't remember the exact who the gymnast was, where it occurred, but this gymnast was doing her bar routine and she dismounted. And literally the minute her feet touched the floor, the bars fell.
Bars fell. Yeah, I've seen that video. I don't think it's somebody who was like very,
it's not
very
somebody famous, and it wasn't like Olympics, but it was a relatively high
it was
level.
still elite. I believe it was still elite, but I don't recall who it was, but I've seen that. That's unbelievable.
And every time I see that, I'm just like, did she know when she was on there?
Like, was it shaky? Was it creaky?
Right. Like, did she? And then that's the other thing, like thinking about the bars, like this repetitive movement over and over again. It's equipment. It has screws that are going to come loose. It has, some of it can just be faulty just by use and wear and the power of these athletes. So it's not unheard of that there could be an equipment failure. Luckily we don't see that happen a ton of times. Luckily in that video, she was already off the equipment and she was safe, but just having that trust in the strange equipment, in these coaches, in these places that you're going, that everything's going to be okay. Yeah. It's kind of like having to start all over again every time you go somewhere new. Yeah. And then she talks a little bit about post-competition depression. So I know that you've competed before. I've done theater before, and I remember somebody that I was working with in theater, he told me that he gets really, really depressed the last night of the show. And I didn't get it at first. And then I realized, like, when you're competing in a sport, when you're on stage, when you're doing these things, so much work goes into the preparation and so much work goes into the performance. And then it's over.
Yeah.
And then you have to start over again with a new routine, with a new show, with something else. And so I think that depression afterwards is natural, even if you do well, even if it's the most amazing competition of your life, even if you win every medal you want, it's over. And then you're like, well, what do I do now? I had all this adrenaline, all this energy, all this time saved up for this one moment, and the moment is gone.
It just drops out. Yeah.
And she talks about how in the 2024 Olympics, she really made a concerted effort to enjoy those moments, to enjoy the competition. She still wanted to do well, but she was like, I need to stay in the moment also and enjoy it. Like I talked about, she did a lot of positive self-talk. She talked about doing a lot of visualization exercises, which that's just kind of imagining yourself performing in a certain way or a positive outcome occurring. She also talks about the social support of her family, of her teammates, of her trainer, and then limiting her social media, limiting the amount of interviews and things so she can kind of just keep her mind focused on the game and drown out a lot of that drama. I'm not going to go into it in depth because she doesn't go to it in depth in the documentary. And I feel like there was like a Lifetime movie about this that made it seem way more dramatic than Simone talks about. Now, I don't know, maybe they took liberties or maybe Simone just doesn't talk about it that way. She was in foster care and she was eventually adopted by her maternal grandfather, who she now calls dad, and she calls his wife mom Yeah, because she would have been a step grandmother. And she's been with them since she was, I believe, about 4 or so. But she was in foster care for, they say, somewhere between 6 and 9 months. She was separated from her older siblings and her younger siblings, so that was traumatic. And they were put in foster care because their mother had significant substance abuse issues. And so obviously that makes things complicated. It's a difficult start to life. But I know there was like a full documentary all about that. And Simone really talks about it as a part of her life. She doesn't ignore it. She doesn't dismiss it, but she also says, like, I'm with my parents and these are the folks who got me where I need to be.
Where I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems, they said there's a part with her mom in the first part where she says the 2021 Olympics are the only time she's never seen Simone perform in person in her entire career. And I was
that's
like,
so sad.
That's like heartbreaking.
Yeah. From when they're little babies doing this all the way up to now.
And then like she had certain routines, like so she would braid her hair before everything. So they had all these like social support moments built in to the sport that she wasn't allowed to do because of COVID. And so how did that affect some of the stuff?
Of course.
And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is the goat controversy. So do you know much about the goat controversy?
I mean, I think that people don't like it because she's embraced it. I don't think she called herself that.
Because she's a woman. Let's just be honest.
Right. I mean, other people named her that, and then she just accepted and embraced it versus saying, "Oh no, I'm not that good." Of course, she's great,
and she's going to own it that she's good.
Yeah.
So in 2020, she was already being called the GOAT before the whole Twisties Olympics drama. And so after that, of course, people were saying she's not, this proves it, blah, 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 blah. And then in preparation for the Paris Olympics, this is how much I love Simone, she goes and she gets herself a diamond encrusted goat necklace.
Yes,
and
yes.
rocking that everywhere. And I was like, yes. And then people started trashing her for that.
And even on her Leos, she had like little,
goat.
like, sparkly goats and stuff. Like, I like it.
Yeah.
Own it.
But exactly like you said, she says other people gave her that title.
Right.
And then when she has the confidence to own it, then she gets crapped on. And I feel like a lot of it is her being a woman. A lot of it is probably her being a Black woman. People don't like to see people who look like Simone succeed. And thank God she doesn't give a damn about those haters because she is out there doing it and showing everybody else how it should be done. Just to recap why she is the GOAT. She has had 5 skills named after her, only one of which another gymnast has been able to successfully execute. So she's got 5 skills named after her. For people who haven't seen the documentary, in order to have a skill named after you, it has to have a certain level of complexity, a certain level of like scoring points, and it has to be performed successfully on a international stage? International stage. So either the Olympics or like the qualifiers or something like that. So these are high stakes to get something named after you. And she's done it 5 times.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I love her like first opening pass, which is one of her Biles, and of course the vault that she did end up doing at the Olympics. Oh my goodness.
Yes. So she's got a bunch of things named after her. And then just her level of difficulty in her skills, even if she's not executing something that's been named after her, they say it multiple times in the documentary that she could go and do her routine and make a bunch of mistakes, and just the difficulty level alone would outrank someone doing a perfect performance in a different routine.
She's an athlete. Yeah. She is the athlete.
And I feel like she's making other people rise to the occasion. So she speaks about in the documentary how Rebecca Andrade from Brazil is her first real competition.
I love her too.
Yes. And what I love in the documentary, we all saw it in the Olympics too, is they cheered on each other. Like they were competing and they were like, I'm going to get her. I'm going to beat her. But every time one of them came off from their routine, they shook hands, they hugged, they talked about, they gave each other praise for their performance. And that is true, beautiful sportsmanship at its best.
It really is. Again, I keep talking about my little child in gymnastics, but you know what? I do see those little moments in her own meets. So once in a while, there'll be in certain levels, only one child from a gym in that level. Mm-hmm. And so they'll stick them and their coach to rotate to the events with another bigger team. Right. And so we had a meet a few weeks ago. It was a small meet and that happened. And that one girl was rotating with my daughter's team. And at the end, the coach and the mother came up and said, your daughter cheered my daughter on. And when she was feeling not confident in something, like she like made friends with her and told her she could do it. And like, you see this little camaraderie happening. And I think that's super special that like we can compete against each other, but we can also like respect like each other's athleticism and that we're all people. And it would just, I don't know. I love seeing that.
I think it's also a true appreciation for the sport where seeing someone else perform well and admiring that and
Yes.
being supportive of that versus saying like, oh, well, I didn't score well or I
Right.
didn't do that well. There's this one part where Simone's kind of gives Rebecca like the side eye, but then like when she does well, she's like, I gotta give it to you. Like you got that. Like good for
Yeah.
you. And then my last point, because I've talked forever and ever, is that to be the GOAT in any sport, in any field, to be the GOAT, when is enough enough? There's
Yeah.
always that expectation to win. There's always that expectation to do bigger and better than you did before. There's always that expectation to go above and beyond. And once you go above and beyond, they want you to go more and more and more and push it. And then if you don't do that, let's say you just did the same exact thing you did last time, then people criticize your appearance, your relationships, your attitude, all of which, you know, Simone talked about in the documentary. So
Yeah.
I think that's more of like a philosophical question for ourselves is like, when is enough enough? And
Right.
if we don't have a definition for that, what does that mean for what we're striving to do? It doesn't
Right.
even have value anymore if there's never an end point, if there's never a success.
Right. When can you close the chapter and be like, okay, like I did it. This is, you know.
Yeah. So welcome to my TED Talk. Thank you. That was it. I talked a lot. I usually don't talk that much.
I know. We're converging on an hour here. I better be quick.
Oh, sorry, guys. Actually, I'm not sorry.
No, you like us, right? You're listening. I hope so.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going in a different direction, but it is something topical to our time right now. So first I will give you my drink. This is a Tara original drink. I combined 2 different drinks to make this because I needed the initials to make sense. So it's called
a picture of this.
I did. I will send it to you. Yes. It is called the OPV, the Orange Pop Vodka Shot. So I put this all in a glass and then I drew it up into a 30 ml syringe. I actually sipped on what was left in the glass while we talked, but I will take the actual shot now, I guess. So it is 1 1/4 ounces of vodka, 1/2 ounce of triple sec, 1/2 ounce of Campari, and 3/4 ounce of orange soda. You put it together in a highball glass and you draw it up into a syringe. These are not like made to dispense medication syringes. These are ones that are made for doing party shots. A lot of the ones I saw online were like Jello shots in these type of things. So it has like a little part on the end that you can actually put your mouth on. But yes, I took a picture of it and it is orange and it looks like a shot. So let me take this shot and then we'll see how this goes.
Go. Chug, 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 chug.
All right. So OPV. So we actually mentioned this OPV, the oral polio vaccine, in episode 2 when we talked about Spoonful of Sugar.
I was going to say, wait, Mary Poppins.
Yes. So I'm actually speaking about one of my favorite shows. I have to watch the rest of the episodes, but
I've never seen this show.
I know it's so good. It's called The Midwife. So Call the Midwife is a British period drama, and it basically takes place in East End of London from the 1950s through the 1970s. And it's originally based on actual real memoirs of a nurse, Jennifer Worth, who worked with this, I believe they're an Anglican religious order at their convent in East End of London. So the way the show is basically is the Nonatus House is a convent, and these are Anglican nuns, and they are nurses, and they are also have some lay nurses who come and stay, and they live in the Nonatus House, and they serve their community. So it's called the Poplar District of London, and it's a very poor area in East End London. And the sisters and the midwives carry out many nursing duties across the community. Some of these are done in the patient's homes, and then they do have clinics in sort of like this gym area. And then there's like more of a private clinic, and there's a doctor that's involved as well. So, between 80 and 100 babies being born each month in this Poplar neighborhood, most of what they do is bringing safe childbirth to women in the area.
So
but
these specific midwives are also doctors?
So they're nurses and they're midwives, and then there is a physician available for things, but they do the hands-on. They do home visits. They do all kinds of things, and they deliver the babies unless it requires the doctor. So a more complex delivery, and they'll bring them sometimes into the the mothers, there's like, they call it the mother's home delivery. I don't know, they have another name for it where they'll bring them in to deliver there, or the hospital if they really needed it. So what I'm speaking about is 2 episodes. They were actually the Christmas specials in 2013 and in 2016. So we'll start with the 2013 Christmas episode. So this is
not like the Black Mirror Christmas episodes.
I haven't watched Black Mirror, so I don't know what I know. There's so many things I haven't seen. Okay. So this is taking place in 1958. So, it's the year's drawing to a close. All the residents of the area Poplar are preparing for Christmas. You see a sign sort of as the camera goes by advertising the polio vaccine clinic. The national program for polio vaccination has been rolling out very slowly, and there have been already about 6 cases in their district since November. So Dr. Turner, he's the physician, he says that he has the 8 to 11-year-old kids booked after the new year to get their vaccines, and he hopes that we can avoid an epidemic. Mm-hmm. We then meet Sheila, who is a former... Yeah. So then we see Sheila, who's a former Nunatis House nun. She actually left the sisterhood, and she's going to be getting married to Dr. Turner. Ooh, so they're, yeah, it's sweet though. It's very sweet. It's very 1950s sweet. He's actually a widower, so he has a son from his marriage, his wife who passed. But they're preparing for their wedding, and it's going to be a very understated affair, is basically what they say. But kind of everything gets thrown into chaos because they find an unexploded bomb, I guess left over from World War II, I assume.
Does this bomb contain polio?
No.
Okay, I was confused. I'm like, wait,
it's a polio bomb. So they found that close to Nonata's house. So they end up basically evacuating, and a bunch of the residents who live in that area end up going to like a center, like the community center, and they're all going to be sort of staying there. So picture a big gym with everybody sleeping in it. At first, it's improper, but Sheila ends up going and sleeping on Dr. Turner's couch after she's evacuated. And so we see, we cut to a scene of Timothy, who is Dr. Turner's son, having a glance in the mirror, and his under eyes look a little bit dark. He's looking at himself. He's looking at his own tongue in the mirror, feeling his neck.
So just to clarify, how old is Dr. Turner? Is his son a child or is this an adult?
His son is a child. I don't know his exact age at this time. I would say somewhere between 10 and 13.
Okay. So like
somewhere
13.
In that range. Then they cut to a scene of the children practicing for their Christmas show, and a child throws up on stage. They go back to
be watching that episode.
Nope. That's just that. That's 1 second. And then
too many.
They see Timothy sitting at the breakfast table. He's looking more pale. He's not eating his breakfast. Then they basically start to say, well, they believe the child who threw up at the Christmas play has polio. They become more concerned because of the congregate setting they've been staying in. Everybody's been staying together in this one congregate area. And so they're afraid that this will spread like wildfire. Yes, Timothy, he's staying at their house, but of course he's around people. He's in the Christmas thing. He's with his father. He's with the nuns. So, he's exposed to different things, even though he's staying in his own home still. Sheila ends up going back to the house and finds Timothy pale and unresponsive on the couch. So, of course, he gets rushed.
Remind me the year, 1930?
58. Yeah. So you cut to them doing a lumbar puncture on Timothy at the hospital. Sheila's very upset. Then they show Timothy in the iron lung. So they, of course, they're going to postpone their wedding. They show the military officer still trying to dismantle this bomb. And it actually goes off. But luckily,
they have enough going on already.
I know. There is minimal damage. So they lift the quadrant street by street.
How good of a bomb is this if it's minimal damage?
It did minimal damage to everything, but Nonata's house was already sort of starting to fall apart. That's the convent. And so that is deemed unsafe. Okay. Because it was already in poor shape. The bomb, damaged the foundation. So, more drama. Sheila and Dr. Turner are seen at Timothy's bedside. He finally starts to wake up. They kind of show Timothy laying in his father's arms, breathing on his own finally, but his body is flaccid appearing. So that gives us a clue.
So I have to say, I thought well, I had no knowledge on polio, but in my head, I made it up that it was just something that caused paralysis in your limbs.
So,
But it sounds like where you're going is that as a side effect of
right.
polio.
It is not everybody will have paralysis. So we'll get to the details, but Timothy definitely has, some neurologic problems from this.
Okay.
So, the narrator tell us that months have passed and they show Sheila starting to get ready for the wedding. And it's no longer an understated affair. They show her wearing a real wedding dress, having all of the nurses and everyone support her.
So she's
And they
like,
actually
forget this boy who can't walk. I'm going to have my wedding.
Well, no. So they show in the church and they show Timothy walking down the aisle with the leg braces
Like
on.
Tiny Tim.
Yeah, he wears the leg braces and he makes it down the aisle. He
Tiny
walks
Tim
his
had
father.
polio, though, right?
I don't know if they ever told us what Tiny Tim had, but I would assume based on the time, yeah, that's probably it. He walks his father down the aisle and they have the happy ending of the weddings. It is really sweet. So that was the episode in 2013, which took place roughly in 1958. Mm-hmm. And then the next Christmas episode that I'm going to go over is very brief, the polio aspect of it, but it's in 2016.
Do they actually call it polio in the episode, or they just?
Yes. We knew about polio. The vaccine literally came out, and they were trying to get it out there before.
No, I just mean, did the episode name it, or they just say this is what happened?
I don't remember how the episodes are named, but yeah, I remember this episode, so I went back and looked for it. So now, the next episode is about Hope Clinic, which is a mission hospital in South Africa. And apparently it's run by Mother Felicity, so a nun from the same order, and
so
one doctor.
Be in the 60s, because it's several years later.
Yeah, so it's a few years later. I don't remember how many because they don't exactly say, but it's 3 seasons later in the show.
So maybe a year, maybe a day, who knows?
I'm thinking it is actually fairly true to time. I think it is about 3 years. And if you look the age Timothy looks later, I think that's correct.
Is it the same actor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is run by one doctor and a handful of nurses. It's very understaffed, and they talk about how they may close the clinic. It's the only clinic in this area of South Africa in 100 miles. Mm-hmm. So they ask the Nanatis House to send a small working party for 4 weeks to help run an urgent polio program and just to assist with the nursing in general.
So I have a question. So it sounds like they kind of did some missionary work over in South Africa.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is a mission hospital and it's run by the nun. So they're just calling some more nun backups and they brought some of their lay nurses along with them.
Do we need the Catholic backup?
Nope. These are Anglicans.
We need the Anglican backup.
They're Catholic backup. Light. They're Catholic without the guilt. At least that's what I've been told.
I wouldn't know how it is.
So I don't go into everything in this episode because there's a lot of it that's not polio related. A lot. It's actually a really amazing episode as well. So, they basically need to run an urgent polio vaccination program and assess the future viability of the clinic. Most of the episode focuses on the poor conditions, the hearts and the hopefulness of the people, about the poor water supply, about the pregnancies of the different women who present. But the one thing they feature is a boy who walks 8 miles with his brother on his back to get his polio vaccine at the clinic. Because his brother, who was on his back, had polio 2 years prior and cannot walk.
Oh, no.
And so Dr. Turner, who also came along on this trip, has to break it to him that the vaccine will not cure his brother's inability to walk. But that they can vaccinate him to prevent him from getting it. But one thing they do in the episode, which ties it all back, is they call back to London and they get Timothy's old braces mailed to South Africa to give this little boy.
So Timothy's doing just fine. But
he is. He's outgrown them. Right. But he's outgrown them and he's actually able to walk now and he doesn't need them any longer. So it's a sweet little tie back to this, couple years ago episode. Now, of course, in all the interim seasons, you see Timothy with the braces and Timothy with his disability. They don't pretend like that didn't happen.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask.
No, this show is
magically get fixed.
Honestly, it's very, very realistic. It's really true. Like the way they cover the diseases in there, I'm going to do so many things based on this because I love the way they do things.
Yeah, I've heard so many people talk about how it's such a great show. I just never started it. I feel like if I started it, I'd be hooked, but I never.
Yeah. And there's I don't remember. I wrote down somewhere how many seasons. I think I forgot to write down.
I know it's
there's
for a long time.
9, 10, maybe more. No, 14. I'm sorry, 14 seasons. I think I've seen 9. There's 14 seasons. So anyway, so polio. So polio is currently considered eradicated in the United States. Currently. We'll get to that later. So let's just talk about what it is really quick. So it's a disease of the motor neurons of the spinal cord and brain stem caused by poliovirus. So some of the things that we recognize and are familiar to us, since it's been eradicated since before we were born, but a flaccid, so flaccid means sort of floppy, asymmetrical weakness, and muscle atrophy are basically some of the hallmarks of this. Because of the loss of those motor neurons and denervation of their skeletal muscles. I mean, if there's no nerves to tell the muscles to move, that's what happens. But because of the success of the vaccine, one of the most feared infections basically is pretty much entirely preventable by proper immunization. So it's caused by a small RNA virus. It's related to the enteroviruses. And it is very, very contagious. It infects people through the mouth. So it is a similar to the other enteroviruses like norovirus and things like that. Basically, it can live in your upper oral passageways, like your throat, but it mostly lives in your intestines. So it is like what we call fecal oral route, which nobody likes to hear, but sorry, people, there are poop particles everywhere. Wash your hands.
When you wipe your butt and you rub your eyes.
Yeah, wash your hands. But you can get polio from contact with feces of an infected person. Droplets from a sneeze or a cough are less common. So we don't realize how quickly fecal oral things can spread. Mm-hmm. It takes one little virus on your finger that you didn't scrub well enough to spread it. Mm-hmm. You can also get it from raw or undercooked food or drink or water that are contaminated, and even putting what we call like a foam mite, so a contaminated object, a toy, between children, putting that in your mouth or touching a contaminated surface. Signs start out very typical of other viruses. So about 1 in 4 people will have flu-like symptoms: sore throat, fever, tiredness, nausea, headache, stomach pain. And there's a good portion of people who have no symptoms.
So it sounds like the character you were talking about, Timothy?
Yes.
He had like
he had the more severe. So we'll get to the more severe, because not everybody gets even the more neurologic symptoms. Mm-hmm. So the flu-like symptoms last 2 to 5 days and go away on their own. But a small portion of people will develop the serious symptoms that affect the brain and the spinal cord. So one of those would be meningitis, which is infection of the covering of the spinal cord and the brain. And that's about 1 in 5, somewhere between 1 to 5 out of 100 people. So 1 to 5%. And then paralysis, which is the more severe, weakness in the arms, legs, or both, is in somewhere to about between 1 out of 200 to 1 in 2,000, depending on which virus type it is, which strain. Paralysis is obviously the most severe symptom. It can lead to permanent disability and death. And about 2 to 10 out of 100 who have paralysis will die because they can't breathe, hence the iron lung. Right. Yeah. Badness.
And so for those of you who are very, very young, I hope we have young listeners, the iron lung was basically this contraption that helped you breathe.
Yeah. Google a picture of it. Doesn't look like a fun place to be. So, the paralytic form starts with severe muscle pains and spasms, and then it's followed by weakness. Muscle weakness becomes maximal within the first 48 hours and up to a week. The progression of the weakness should be stopped basically after their fever goes back to normal. Typically, the weakness is asymmetrical, with the lower limbs typically affected more than the upper. And the muscle tone is flaccid, so floppy, can't do anything. Reflexes are initially actually brisk and then become completely absent.
So it's like a gradual.
Yeah. And, patients can have these coarse muscle fasciculations. They look like sort of spasms. And they can complain of paresthesias, which is tingling, numbness, sensations in the affected limbs without real loss of true sensation. So they would have pinprick sensation, but have that sort of arm asleep kind of feeling. You've laid on your arm wrong. The paralysis typically is days or weeks, and then recovery happens over months or years. Typically, it would be diagnosed nowadays if we were looking for it with PCR, which is looking for the virus DNA or RNA in this case. And it can come from their stool, from their throat, or from their cerebrospinal fluid. And there is no cure or treatment. It is basically supportive care, getting them to the other end of this and supporting their breathing, essentially. And
So
then, of
even
course,
now there's still no cure.
right.
Okay.
Right. And we'll get to in a moment that there are still cases worldwide. The US does not, but there are cases in the world. Physical therapy, things like that to get patients moving again. And there is also something which is interesting. I didn't realize that it's called post-polio syndrome. And it can occur basically in 25 to 40 out of 100. So 25 to 40% of polio survivors can have this occur 15 to 40 years later, where they can have muscle weakness, mental and physical fatigue, and joint pain. So
it's kind of like dormant until then, and then it
yeah, it's not a reactivation of the virus itself per se. They don't really know, but it's just interesting. I hadn't heard of that. And some can have like actual weakness and atrophy, and some just have sort of these non-specific symptoms. That part of things is not life-threatening, but obviously is going to affect your quality of life. So what did we do to get where we are now, where we are lucky enough to not know much about polio? I mean, I had to read on it.
Who had it?
We did.
And
Yes.
we got vaccines.
Yes. I mean, it's one of those things that literally, it's not a question on my boards when I had to take them. Like I had to learn about measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, all those, but polio, there's no question because it was gone, which is amazing.
Well, I think about, and this is kind of a tangent, but not really. I feel like when we were in high school, we had a full like month course talking about HIV and AIDS, where I feel like that's not a conversation that people have anymore, at least not to the extent that we did. Now it's more about, using PrEP or things like that. But when we were told about it, it was like, you're going to die if you get this.
Right. Right. This is modern medicine. This is where we are. So things improve and change.
But
so
it's crazy to see that change in our lifetime.
with our own
in
lifetime.
the last
Right.
20 years.
And a lot of people, I would say, would know a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or even a parent if it was in the 50s who did have something left from polio. Like that was not unusual, but you're of course seeing that less and less now as those people have aged and have become older. So the polio vaccine was licensed for use in the US in 1955. It's going to vary by country in their licensing. It was developed by Jonas Salk.
I knew that.
Yes.
I don't know why I knew that, but I knew that.
So that was the inactivated polio vaccine, the IPV. And then the live attenuated polio vaccine, the OPV, was developed by Albert Sabin and was available in 1961.
Sorry, Big Al, I didn't know that.
Sabin? Yeah, I know the name. And it was officially eradicated polio in the United States in 1979, the year we were born.
Just aged us. Thank you for that.
Well, they're going to figure it out eventually with all these references. So the last case of indigenous polio in the country was in 1977, and the widespread use of vaccines basically are what caused this to happen. Currently, the CDC recommends children in the United States get 4 doses of the inactivated polio vaccine. That's the shot. At 2 months, 4 months, and somewhere between 6 and 18 months old, and then again between 4 and 6 years old. Really and it's given as an injection in the arm or the leg. So where are we now with polio? So we know the U.S. is still considered it eradicated, but there was 2022, the CDC was notified of a case of polio in an unvaccinated individual from Rockland County, New York. And that was actually caused by vaccine-derived polio, which I'll go into in just a moment. The CDC consulted with the New York State Department of Health. They did see some wastewater evidence, and they knew people are being infected. But generally, when they don't see it clinically in a real person, they don't know who was infected. And essentially, that outbreak extinguished itself. Like it was present, but not really clinically, other than this one person. But throughout the world, we've continued to see vaccine-derived polio outbreaks in places like Gaza. And so that's why we use the inactivated polio vaccine versus the OPV, which is a live vaccine, which can be transmitted person to person. So the difference is that the the IPV that we use are only very effective if there's an extremely high uptake of the population. So it worked well because at that time, everybody's like, give me whatever you got. Like, I don't want to have this. And everybody lined up for it. The oral polio vaccine is easier because it's easier to give to larger populations, and it cheaper, of course, which is always helpful when you're doing worldwide vaccination campaigns. It is also, interestingly enough, because it can have some spread, it can kind of mildly spread in a population and thus immunizes individuals who were immunized. So I take the oral polio vaccine and I give you a little bit, but neither of us gets really sick or anything, but we both develop immunity. So that's why it's really used in these worldwide vaccine campaigns in order to help vaccinate large populations. But we do have now a worsening outbreak of an actual wild type polio. So that is not vaccine derived, and that is in Pakistan. So it's been, it's been really close to eradication in most of the world, except for Pakistan and Afghanistan. There's been a lot of progress, fewer than 24 cases for several years, but it's partially being undone right now. Right now, the capital of Pakistan, where about 1 million people live, one case was detected, and then the wastewater detection also shows that there are other cases. And in Afghanistan, more cases are also circulating, both wild type and vaccine related. And, again, high use of the vaccine is the only way to basically stop this. But the citizens, my brain and mouth aren't working. Citizens of Pakistan have seen declining rates of immunization. Some of them say this is related to the U.S. government because when they were looking for Osama bin Laden, they used a fake vaccination program
Well, I was also thinking just like, I'm sure the availability of vaccines kind of goes up and down depending on the political environment.
Right. But, they were trying to find Osama bin Laden and they used fake vaccination campaigns, I guess, to pull him out. Yeah. So obviously the U.S. government said, sorry, in 2014 and said, we will never do that again. But the damage was done. The mistrust in the system was there. And basically the Taliban also banned the polio vaccine programs, which obviously hasn't helped things. So right now, Pakistan is really trying to push a truly massive, vaccine campaign and hoping to reverse it. And then Afghanistan really isn't doing much right now because the Taliban had banned that. So, it's quite an interesting time. We're still doing well in the US, but, with the current choice for health secretary, if anyone doesn't live under a rock, there's a man, I'm not going to call him a gentleman, RFK.
He's a man.
Robert F. Kennedy. And he's made some wild claims, and he even has made some wild claims about polio, which...
Let's just say he's not your mama's Kennedy. He's
No, different kind.
Still related, but different kind.
So, a couple of his things, and these are all quoted from actual news articles or podcasts that he was interviewed on. This is his own words. I am not putting words in his mouth. He had said that after the vaccine was first introduced, it might have caused a wave of cancer that killed many, 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 many more people than polio ever did.
He said 5 many's.
Let me count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Correct. Yes. And he said the idea that the vaccine resulted in a drastic decline in polio cases is a mythology and just not true. Right. Yeah.
That needs to be a clip. My automatic response, which was nonverbal.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how to capture this. Yeah. So, there's a lawyer, this Aaron Siri, who was advising Kennedy during the transition, had filed petitions on behalf of a nonprofit to revoke federal approval of the standalone polio vaccine and to pause distribution of 13 other shots, some of which include polio immunization. There was a podcast in July of 2023 where with a computer scientist named Lex Friedman, Mr. Kennedy said there's no vaccine that is, safe and effective. And he later, of course, walked that back. But, once you say things, what do they say? Like, there's this phrase like the lies, fly and the truth comes humbling, limping behind, sort of like once you say something is out there.
I just think about in our field, once it's documented, it's truth. So
right. You said it.
Go.
He said that the polio vaccine contained a virus called simian virus 40 and claimed that it caused an explosion of soft tissue cancers among people of his generation. And that also killed many, 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 many more people than polio ever did.
He likes the word many.
Yeah. I think it's the same quote, just repeated later in the article. So he was referring to a period that actually did happen between 1955 and 1963, which some of the polio vaccine was contaminated with the simian virus. It came from the monkey cell cultures they were using, but it was carefully examined later by researchers. And what happened was if they injected that virus into rodents, they got cancer. But they also looked back and realized that the simian virus was also killed when they killed the polio virus, because this is an inactivated virus.
Right. So even though it was there,
it was killed.
Was addressing both.
Right. And in the oral polio doses, the simian virus was killed in the digestive tract. And in the 90s, there was a study that was retrospective, looked back at all these people and actually followed them for 30 years. And their cancer rates of those people who received the vaccine during that time was no different than the general population.
Yeah. Well, I feel like for a long time, there's been conversation, both true and false, about cancer clusters and things that are causing cancer, things that are associated with cancer that either we don't have the science yet or people are just making up bunk science about it.
Right.
So and this is the first time I've heard that where this causes cancer.
It's so complex, and there's not one thing, and cancer is not one disease, but many, and there are multiple factors, including we diagnose it better now. So incidence is going to go up. People are living longer, there's a whole lot. But anyway, he also said that the proposition and theology that smallpox and polio were abolished due to vaccination is controversial. In 2020, he said this. That is not a proposition that is universally accepted. He stated that that the decline in deaths from infectious disease during the first half of the 20th century had nothing to do with vaccines. It had everything to do with sanitation, hygiene, electric refrigerators, and reduction in population densities. Well, in the 1950s, they already had sanitation, hygiene, and refrigerators.
I'm not even going there. I'm still stuck at the part where you are not a scientist, sir.
No, you are not.
To be touting all of this scientific information. Now,
nope.
Do I think those things contributed to healthier living? Yes.
Right.
But we can't say one didn't cause it, but this did. Refrigerators did not save our life. I will tell you that right now. And we're just going there. It didn't happen. It made things better, healthier. But
these existed a lot longer. Refrigerators have been around a lot longer than since 1958 or whatever.
It's called the icebox. So
all those things changed before the vaccine. 1955 that the vaccine came out. But we had refrigerators. So one more set of his claims, and then we'll go on to the real world. In another podcast taped in 2019 or released in 2023, he cast doubt on the idea that vaccines have wiped out infectious disease. I know it's a mythology to say it cured polio and smallpox and measles, but it's just not true.
I'm feeling torn because I feel like, yes, those diseases still exist. We didn't get rid of the diseases. We got rid of the infection rate.
Right. So there's a definition of eradicated. That's not just a term people throw around lightly. That has to be,
extinct. You need a certain set of criteria to say that is what happened.
Right. No cases, clinical cases in the U.S. for this many years equals that.
Well, and if he was saying we didn't eradicate it globally, yes, that's correct. But if he's talking about the U.S., then we need some fact checking going on.
Right. And so just one quick statistics from when the vaccine was first licensed in 1955. So we'll say 1952, there were 16,000 cases and 1,800 deaths each year from polio.
Okay.
And by 1962, 10 years later, less than 1,000 cases, from 16,000 to 1,000, and from 1,800 deaths down to less than 100 deaths. So that's pretty clear, evidence that vaccine 10 years later, nobody's getting it. Nobody's dying.
Right. I'm trying to take it with a grain of salt and give him the benefit of the doubt. And I guess
no,
I'm just trying to be
not him.
I'm not saying that I actually feel this way. I'm just trying to, play devil's advocate in that, for example, this happened a lot with COVID, where we would say people died from pneumonia. but it was because they had COVID and their lungs didn't,
Right.
So I feel like if he's looking at the data in that way that is misguided, then maybe, and then
I guess there's
always go with the unreported cases, but still, I think the main goal that he's in this rhetoric that he's trying to push is not the right goal.
There's a whole lot more to unpack about him. He makes money as a lawyer suing companies for vaccines, and he vaccinates his own kids. So we'll leave him because I don't want to give myself any more anger. But
I'm just saying, like, when sometimes, like, because we all see on social media people saying, I did my research and this, and this. It's like, you need to look at research in the context. You can't pull something that, was research from 1952 and say it's something still true today. And so everything you need to take as an educated consumer and say, like, where is the truth in this? Where are the lies in this? Why is someone saying this? Do they know what they're saying?
I think you need to be somebody who understands data and studies and to be able to extrapolate the right information. And we have trusted people to do that, like epidemiologists whose literal sole job is to do that. I think something with COVID that came out is just because you have a platform to say something doesn't mean you're an expert in it.
Which is sad because I feel like it was happening before COVID, but then when it was affecting people's literal day-to-day health and well-being, people took it more seriously.
Yeah. So, I mean, the last point is, what can we do? Continue to vaccinate our children, continue to follow. Now I'm going to tell you to follow the World Health Organization for good information right now, because the CDC forward facing information has been limited. Some things have been taken down. Some things have been put back.
There may not be a CDC. The way things are
right now, even though we're pulling out of WHO, the WHO still exists as a international organization with good data. Their website is very navigatable. So go there for your best information. Talk to your healthcare providers, the people you trust and face to face, your pediatricians, your internist, your family practice provider, your GYN, whoever you see. Just speak to them. They'll be able to help you to discern what's what and what's right for you. But let's keep polio gone. I don't want to have to treat that. That's very scary. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. So that's polio, orange vodka shots, and polio.
How are you feeling after doing a shot on a Monday night?
I'm pretty good. It's not too much going on in there. It's pretty good. All right. So that concludes our little chat. Follow us. And so hour and a half. This is hitting a record. We said last time it was...
I will say this one was my fault, but I usually don't talk as much. So I think I was like on like a high of, I'm talking.
That's all right. Go for it. So, follow us on social media, the usual. So Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest. Listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. Tell your friends, tell your coworkers.
At medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. I'm still waiting for an email. No one has sent me one yet. I'm very sad.
Yeah, we want to talk to you guys.
I might have to send myself an email just so I don't feel bad.
So, thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.